In terms of Al-Qaeda reaching out and recruiting Westerners and Americans and women, how would you rate that kind of a threat?
Well, Al-Qaeda has shown, at least in terms of their media operations, substantial, whether it's a talent or just luck, to recruit some very talented Americans. Adam Gaddan, who is now known as Azam al-Amriki, is very eloquent in speaking in the vernacular of Americans. They now have Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a cleric here in the United States, was born in the United States, and he is clearly a young firebrand that has a very significant effect on young Muslim males, especially in English-speaking countries. Their magazine, Inspire, which is an English-language magazine, is edited by a U.S. citizen from North Carolina. So in terms of what Al-Qaeda sees as its main job, which is incitement and instigation, they're clearly focused on the English-speaking world, and they're very determined to speak in a form of English that's very accessible to native-born Muslim Americans, or Brits, or Canadians.
Back to the Inspire. Incite actually would be a little bit more appropriate.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman in North Carolina who's editing and running.
He's from North Carolina. He's in Yemen now.
Oh, he's in Yemen now.
He's in Yemen now.
I guess that would be illegal activity here in the United States if you were.
I think it's illegal activity for an American to do, even if he's overseas. But I'm not.
Right.
I'm not sure. But the odds of grabbing him are probably very low.
In terms of national security, how important is the perception of America's strength?
I think any nation state, historically, if it expects to prosper and to be left alone by enemies, needs to project a great strength, but even more a will to use its strength. In the Middle East, generally, the weak are picked on, but even more held in contempt are strong entities that won't defend themselves. And for better or worse, we have sent our military into Iraq and Afghanistan with one hand tied behind their back. And at the moment, the U.S. military is perceived as being very much a straw man. Repeatedly, Islamist leaders have said, you know, the Americans are simple to fight after the Soviets. The Soviets would come out and get us, but the Americans just use missiles and airplanes. And so I think, although it's popular in the West to say that war never solves anything, what we've proven, at least, is that tepid war certainly doesn't improve anything.
In your new book, your biography of Osama bin Laden, you make a very interesting point where Osama bin Laden is explaining his fight against the United States and America as a bicycle with two wheels, one wheel made of steel and the other wheel made of wood. And he said that he felt that America was the wooden wheel, and it was really more strategically beneficial to go after the weaker wheel first, because he feels he can drain us economically and sort of spread our resources very thin and drag us into endless wars. That's very interesting, considering you would think America might be the steel wheel and Israel the wooden wheel. And his goal is to, as he said, to take out the wooden wheel so he can go after the steel wheel, which is Israel.
He regards Israel as a client of the United States, as kind of a crusader outpost, in his words.
But does he see Israel as a formidable foe in some way?
He has no doubt that the Israelis have the will to survive and have the will to use their military power to the extent that's necessary without worrying about really what the world thinks. After a long discussion within the Islamist movement, bin Laden had decided in '96 that for all of his main enemies, all of Islam's main enemies in his interpretation, whether it was Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, that the key, the common denominator to defeating them is getting rid of the Americans from the Middle East. Because it is our guns, our money, our diplomatic support that really keeps those regimes propped up. Again, in their interpretation. And so when he talks about going after the wooden wheel, we are it. Because he doesn't think we have the will to fight. He knows we won't use our full military. We've proven that, and he simply is, I think, amazed that in a country of 300 million people, we are going to leave Afghanistan while losing no more than 1,000. To be driven so hard by casualties is something that's foreign, at least to their experience.
Egypt is a big topic today. What do you see Muslim Brotherhood? What role do you see them taking in the forming of a new government, if any?
Well, I think it's much of the media has described them as kind of a Kiwanis club that used to be involved in violence, but now it's not. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood is like the Saudi government. They're imperialists. They want to spread Islam around the world, and they do have a dormant military wing. It hasn't been active in recent years, but it's certainly still there. The most important thing, though I think for Americans to think about, is that it is the only political entity outside of Mubarak's government that has a nationwide infrastructure. It delivers social services and has to be part of any government that succeeds Mubarak.
It's very similar to Hezbollah.
In many ways it is, except it's much more popular around the world because the world is so much more Sunni than it is Shia.
So the Muslim Brotherhood is a larger organization than Hezbollah.
Much bigger. There's probably a section of the Muslim Brotherhood in 70 or 80 countries around the world. It's been very active in the United States for 30 years.
It's not an outlawed terror organization?
No, it's not listed as a terrorist organization. It's banned in Egypt, but it's tolerated because it provides government services that the government can't provide.